Good evening. A couple of minutes, if I could get everybody's attention. A couple of minutes late because we had an executive session. I'd like to call this meeting of the Fairfield Public Schools Board of Education regular meeting to order. Present is Mrs. Eileen Lou McCormick, Ms. Donna Carnell, Mrs. Jessica Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Ms. Tricia Pitko, Mr. Nick Asa, Mrs. Jennifer Maxon-Knelly, and Mr. John Llewellyn. We do expect Mr. Patton a little bit late, so if I could ask you to all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We open with public comment to talk about agenda items only, so anybody that wishes to come forward to talk about any of the agenda items that you see in front of you, please step forward. State your name and address. I don't see anybody standing up, so thank you very much. We'll move on to the new business, and that's an appointment of the CAC representative. So the recommended motion is that the Board of Education appoint Mr. Tom Flynn as the BOE CAC Area 2 representative. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mrs. Maxon-Knelly. Let me, you have in closure number 1 the resume that Mr. Flynn has provided us. For those of you who don't know, there are 2 well-known Mr. Tom Flynn's in this community. This happens to be the original one, actually. So I'll ask Mr. Flynn if you would stand up just so that people who don't recognize you will know who they're talking about. Okay. The CAC board is the board that oversees Fair TV. It's a little bit not exactly that description, but essentially from our perspective, that's what it is. Mr. Flynn has served on that board before. His term expired. I didn't recognize that it had expired, and I'm not sure he recognized when it expired, but it has, and so therefore we need to reappoint him. This is the only appointed position that by the bylaws of the CAC, it has to be elected by the Board of Education, and so therefore it's on our agenda. Do people have questions on either the entity itself or questions that you'd want to pose to Mr. Flynn? Well, it wasn't much of a campaign. Okay. It is a voting item. Anybody from the public wish to speak on this item? Hearing nobody come forward. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education appoint Mr. Tom Flynn as the BOE CAC Area 2 representative. All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous with the 8 people present. You are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, or you are welcome to go about your business. Thank you very much, Mr. Flynn, for representing us on this important body. Okay. Item number 4B, discussion of priorities for excellence. The board is recognizing that at our last meeting, the district priorities for excellence were presented and discussed, and one of those issues was the one that's on the agenda here. That is not a normal priority for us. We haven't seen it in the past, and it requires some special discussion so that the board has input on how we're going to approach accomplishing that. I thought I'd start off first and have Dr. Jones say a little bit about what her thoughts were when she originally proposed that as a district priority. Dr. Jones.
And I did mention this, I think, at the last Board of Education meeting as well, that one of the reasons this is in as a priority is really listening to all the discussions that were happening last spring and continuing now, as we know we're getting ready to go into some very challenging budget times. And this particular item deals with the actual facilities, and that's where it falls in the priorities. But I do think it's good just to clarify, structural change means more than just facilities, that we are going to turn over every stone that we can. But in relation to the facilities component, we have engaged in Malone and McBroom, and one of the reasons, well, it's really two reasons we stayed with them. One reason is they have done previous work for us, and so they have a database that they've already built up, and they can build on that work they've already done. We're also able to contract them through CES, so we get better value for the dollar. We are looking at a 10-year projection, which we also need to consider for our Mill Hill construction that's coming up. We've asked them to look at just facility usage in general and look at that in regard to the unique programs that are also in our building, so that we can have a really good understanding of X amount of classrooms, but some of those classrooms are used for unique programming, which they have not looked at for us before. And then they're also looking just at the racial imbalance issue, which the work they did for us previously, and taking one more look at demographics. Have we seen demographic shifts? What's happening this year with our enrollment? And we've already sent them all the newest information as of today, but they will do the new count for us officially on that October 1 date. Along with structural change, just before, I know before Ms. Chair Dwyer actually talks a little bit about the structure to gain community input, I do want to just point out some of the things when I talk about structural change are even things that we consider small, but they're not always so small, like our buses and the way we've approached the busing this year. And I know it was not an easy switch for us to have a wait list. It's not something we've done in the past, but by approaching the way that we were working with our buses, not only did we not add the additional budget, the bus in the budget that we thought we needed this year, we didn't need that bus, plus Ms. Munsell, in working with Transportation Department, has been able to eliminate another bus. So it's really like two teachers, and that's how we look at it, that every time we go through one of these structural changes that can be hard, because if you're a family and you want your child on the wait list and you have to wait until the second or third week, and could be longer than that, just depending on the bus, that's not easy. The other thing, and so thank you to everybody in transportation, especially Ms. Munsell, Mr. Fickey, who have worked really hard on that. Also with our hiring, this year we were very meticulous about hiring at the beginning of the year, and special thanks to our principals, because it was a different process for elementary. Generally, when we go to what we call our advance, it's our retreat time towards the end of August, that's when we start adding teachers. We waited this year literally right up until the week before school started, and we were confirming every single child before we added a teacher. And that helped us be able to catch some of those withdrawals that happen at the end of the summer. But it was a little stressful, because usually they could send those letters out a little sooner. We are not going to be able to do that going forward if we're really going to be vigilant about hiring and how that practice goes. And a special thanks to Ms. Miner, who was brand new in her role, literally every day going into IC system and also working with our registrars, so we knew not only who was already in the system, but who had shown up that had an enrollment appointment within the next 3 days, so that we knew which building they were going and which grade. And that really helped us a lot, where we would have added a teacher in the past, we didn't actually add this year, just simply because we waited that little bit longer and had really good information. And I also, along structural change, just want to mention, I know that Bob Schmiller is in the back. FEA has made a commitment for them to also have a committee, and they're going to be bringing some, what they see as efficiencies from the teacher's lens also to us, which will go along with this. So we're doing a lot of work, and it has to happen fairly quickly, because the budget work starts now. So that's kind of my component on that.
Okay. When we've approached an issue of, I'll say, of this nature, our bylaws allow for us to put together an ad hoc committee that is composed of 3 board members and those members of the community that are helpful to address the various issues. And so as Dr. Jones and I looked at how to approach this, we've thought that we would be best served by creating this kind of a committee, but have it be broad-based, that in addition to the 3 Board of Ed members, that we go to the Board of Selectmen and ask them to participate and put somebody on this committee Mr. Tetro is open to that idea. Go to the Board of Finance with the same thing. Go to the RTM and ask somebody from each caucus, Democratic and Republican caucus, to join the committee. Ask for FEA plus perhaps one non-certified union person, because it's at the end of the day, whatever bright ideas we come up with, it's the staff who have to actually implement them. So have a non-certified staff person on there. And then add maybe 3 at-large community members, depending on who gets appointed from the various bodies. We may not have enough women, we might not have enough parents, we might not have enough men, so we want to have different perspectives. And so our thought was to approach it from that perspective. And before I took that step, I wanted to have a discussion among the board to see what thoughts they had as we approach trying to address this question. And the last comment I'd make, and then open it up to the board, there is no hidden agenda. There's no, oh, what we really want to do is this. What we really want to do is show the community that we have asked ourselves whatever difficult questions have to be asked and provided answers so that we know what options we have that will help us run the same quality or better district, but at a more efficient manner. So having said that, who wants to speak? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
First, I am enthusiastically in favor of this idea. I had originally just, sitting on my own, been trying to think of what are we going to do about this year. I mean, I think we all know waiting till January, really, it's not an option. Setting direction to the district is not an option and would be grossly unfair. I'd originally thought of coming back to the board with maybe we need to start up our finance subcommittee again. But even then, I know that the work of policy committee with 3 people, this is just so much bigger, and that 3 people is enough. So I just love the idea of drawing in all of these other town bodies, especially with their experience, not only in whatever the finances and the priorities of the town and their different backgrounds. I think this is very much an issue of needing that a wide variety of backgrounds, finance, business, education, of course, and I think this is a wonderful idea, and I can't wait to see it get off the ground.
Other comments from board members? Mr. Llewellyn.
Might I suggest adding some high school students as well, because they may have a different perspective.
I like that idea, high school. Other board members' comments? Mrs. Gerber.
Well, I guess just to get a sense of, and I know that this is still kind of a work in progress, but is there any kind of tentative timeline as to what the committee, when they will form, when they will meet, what's the date by which they need to get back, and how is that going to work? Are they going to vote on something and give it to the board? Are they just going to make a list of suggestions, and then it's up to the board and Dr. Jones and the other administrators to figure out which makes the most sense? Just trying to get a better sense of if there's any, and I know it's still in the planning stages, so perhaps you don't have answers to all those questions, but just to get a sense of what direction we're headed in and what kind of timeline we're looking at.
For me, after tonight's meeting, if the board says, yes, this seems like a good approach, I will start recruiting. Of course, the timeline depends on them, the various people saying, yes, I'm on board. So I'm hoping to start it as soon as possible. I think Mrs. Gerber raises a good question or point. Are we expecting this committee to bring forth a series of options? Here's what this might save us, and here's the cost of it, i.e. the cost of impacts on service, but not bring a recommendation, just explore and present to the board the facts, or are we expecting them to make recommendations from among those options? What would the board's pleasure be? Ultimately, it is the board that makes the decision, but we can go either way. Mrs. Lou McCormick.
I might suggest as a start, because we don't know who is composing this committee and the direction that they are likely to take, we might just, as an initial, have them present the different ideas that they've come up with some detail for the pros and cons to delineate, and then step back. And if, in fact, the board wants them to narrow it down to 3 or 5 ideas or a single recommendation, we can then tell them that we feel that we would like to empower them to do that. But maybe as a start, rather than them like going through everything and making the decision to take things off, have them present the ideas to the board first, so that we can hear all the ideas. Just a suggestion, but.
I'll go to Ms. Pitko and then Mrs. Gerber, and then over to Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
I share Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly's view on this. I just want to add, I'm reading where it says, with the assistance of engaging an outside consultant, trying to understand all these stakeholders coming together, looking at our structural changes. Is the consultant going to come back first? Were we talking about coming back in October with the consultant, and then this group who volunteered would chime in?
I will say this, that all of our budgets really come down to, they're a takeoff on our enrollment count. And so the consultant we're hoping to get their report in here by the beginning of October, so that will form the basis of the discussions. I guess you could say that if the committee said, hey, we need a consultant to investigate a little bit more detail about this, we could extend their contract. But right now, it's based on enrollment projections, is what the focus of their report is.
And I would hope that if we form the committee, that the night Malone and McBroom are presenting, that they're here. That new committee is here.
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, I guess I was kind of going to ask the same question, just in terms of, so Malone and McBroom, they are just doing enrollment numbers?
They're also doing the facilities, but they're going to have as much as they can to us in October. It could be even another 2 or 3 weeks before, because they don't get our count until October 1, but they're doing
Right.
10-year projection.
Okay.
They're also looking at the facilities.
When you say looking at the facilities, what does that mean?
Going in and looking at where, in the past, we've always said we had a 504, X amount of classrooms.
Right.
We've asked them to actually look at the usage of the building so that we understand in a better way, because when people talk about closing a school, because there's X amount of classrooms, we have X amount of children, we're not taking into consideration that we have 5 CLC classrooms, we have 3 pre-K classrooms, counting the ECC one now, that's 8 classrooms just for that piece. And so that's not 8 times 24 or 25 kids that we can actually have. So they're looking at usage and actually doing the building walkthroughs, getting a different understanding than they even had last time.
Okay, so basically their report will be enrollment and then looking at
Building
each
usage.
of the buildings to see how they are used, and kind of, I know it's like MGT had their kind of the 2 different capacity numbers, the usage and that type of thing. Is that going to be similar to what?
It'll be
gonna
similar
do?
to that, and then we've also asked them, looking at grade configuration, is there anything that they would suggest when they're looking at the building from a different lens that would be structural in nature? And so with that, you don't know until they go in and look at the buildings.
Okay, and then I guess the other question too, based on, the sense of, let's just say, they said, okay, well, we could close a school or something like
Right.
that. Would that be simply facilities-based, or would it also be cost-based? Would they say, if we close X school, it will save us Y dollars? Or is it purely they're saying, based on the space that we have, you could do this, but we don't know how much it would cost you or save you?
Yeah, I think that we're going to have to, whether they do it or we do it, or we have to get additional help, depending on what information they bring to us, because they won't necessarily know the staffing component, for instance, if you're going to lose an administrative position.
right, yeah.
Yeah, so, but I would hope that, especially from this committee, that's part of the work that we would do, is make sure the board has factual, good information to even be able to consider about what you can or can't do, and then what is the cost savings to do it? Is it really worth it? Let's say it was closing a school. If that's only going to save us $200,000, is it worth it to do that? And really having good factual information so the board can have good, hearty discussions.
Okay, great. And then I guess the other question I had, or just the statement, is that the committee, these will be public meetings that these committees will be having, so the public,
Yes,
Will
subject to
attend.
FOI.
correct. So they would be, so people not, especially members of the public who wouldn't necessarily be the at-large members, they could still attend, as our other committee meetings have been. So they'd be noticed,
Yep.
they'd be public meetings, and I don't know if we'd want to get Fair TV to come to them, perhaps, if that would be.
Well, Fair
helpful.
TV does their own scheduling, but we can certainly ask.
Right, just because I'm sure it would have a fair amount of public interest,
And
so.
our practice has been to allow public comment, so I would have to believe that this committee will have some provisions for public comment during their sessions as well. Mrs. Maxon Connelly, followed by Mr. Asa.
Well, just one quick remark. Mrs. Gerber covered a lot of what I wanted to say, so thank you. I think that what they bring back to this, because first of all, I also think about that commission, the communications committee that did all that work, and then unfortunately what it was greeted by at the board table was a great deal of confusion and debate over what do we do with this now? Are we accepting it, reviewing it, voting on it, et cetera? So I do think it helps if we have that conversation and make that clear. But to me, this would be akin to the audit, the operational audit that we did a few years ago. I mean, I don't think it should be straight up brainstorming. I think the committee owes it to do some looking into some of the ideas, because if they're not feasible, let's take it off that list right away. But then it's just presenting that full list, and while it's coming to the board, it's really going to Dr. Jones, who's going to be very much in the midst of creating the budget at that point. You know, I would hope it would be to her well in time before it's coming to us in January. And, you know, it may even give some time in December for some feedback on some early ideas. Just want to give you a heads up, we couldn't do idea A, B, and C because of this reason, and this way we're not going over that ground in January. So obviously this is pretty time-intensive to get this up off the ground and then having these meetings. But, you know, I definitely wouldn't want this pared down to what they think their 3 top ideas are. I'd rather let's hear all of it.
Mr. Asa.
A couple things. Regarding the timeline, I think we need to have a tight timeline on this. I think that's very important. That being said, I think the fact that if we are going to stick to a tight timeline, that there needs to be a written charge from the Board of Ed for the committee.
If I just, our bylaws actually require that we put a commission together.
Yeah.
So after tonight's meeting, I will type something up and send it to the board.
Okay. And I just, in that charge, it just include deadlines, because I think that's very important here. And I think this has to be done before we start recruiting volunteers, would be my input.
Mr. Patton.
I'll echo pretty much everything that Mr. Asa just said. I think that before we start recruiting, I think we need to actually have a charge as to what this committee is going to be tasked with. The deadlines need to be as specific as we can, because we need to know what type of information that we want to get back. So, and to your point, if we just, or to, I think Jen's point, if we just have, you know, our, like the top 3 things the committee decides to work on, I think we kind of need to see the laundry list first, and then we, as a board, give them the direction of, you know, what things that we, or that they focus on. So I guess to ask about the formation, according to our bylaws, normally the committee is formed and then they select a chair and all that. Are we still staying to that?
The 3 members of the Board of Education would elect a chair of that group, correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
After the committee is formed.
Yeah, once the committee is formed.
And that person or that group will essentially set the agenda according to the charge.
That group will set the agenda according to the charge. Yeah, correct.
Right. Okay.
I think nobody else is, Mrs. Maxon, can I?
Just one quick follow-up that a point I would disagree about. I would not want to wait till we vote on this 2 weeks from now before we approach the other boards. I agree, maybe nothing purely definitive in nature, but to not put them on note, considering that the first thing we started with is, we know this has to get back quickly. I think to not put, I mean, we've obviously got the meeting with Board of Finance in 1 week, but to put them on notice, to put the Board of Selectmen on notice, to put the RTM on notice, unless anyone at the board disagrees with the notion of having representatives of those town boards. Maybe the exact makeup I wouldn't disagree with Mr. Patton on, but to not even officially, I would very much want to empower our chair to immediately reach out to those other boards to say, we are talking about this, we want to pull this together, you know, we need to get this committee going. specific details to follow in 2 weeks, but please start, I don't know if it's
That would
drumming
be
up
my
volunteer.
intent.
Yeah.
That would be my intent, to kind of go on parallel tracks, recruit and develop the commission statements so that they're kind of like simultaneous documents. Mr. Asa?
I guess we're just going back and forth here, but I guess without a charge, what are we asking them to do?
If I may respond, to me, it's what we already have here as a discussion item on, so it's coming out of the initiatives, the direction that Dr. Jones is setting for the district, so that was discussed last meeting. Here's the wording of the topic. I completely agree with you. The charge itself needs to be more specifically fleshed out, but essentially it's this discussion of priorities for excellence is what we'll be going to those other town boards for. So, as I said, it's not the definitive, but to not have bodies ready to hit the ground running, I don't want this delayed and, well, we actually couldn't get the work done until January sort of thing. I just think delays would be
So I'll
tough.
suggest that my intention is that before the week is out, this board will have a draft commission statement. At the same time, I will be talking to the other boards. It's for the recruitment purposes. And I don't want to wait for the next board meeting to get comments from board members. So when I ask, please comment on this commission statement, every once in a while there are emails that just don't get attended to. Please make this email something that you do attend to and get comments back if you have comments on the commission statement. Did you have another comment?
No,
before go to
I
Mrs.
see what,
Elling?
I see what's being said. I'm just worried about it forming the committee and having them start and just going way out of scope.
Yeah.
And so that was my point.
Yeah. Mrs. Lou McCormick?
On that note, I do believe that given the time constraint, these things need to kind of happen simultaneously. It's not ideal, but I don't think we have the luxury of time to sit back. So I think everybody understands that there will be time deadlines, and that could alter at the last minute participation. But I would say, I would agree with Mrs. Kennelly that we probably need to just at least start the process. But on a secondary note, as we put the committee together, I did want to ask that when we do put it together, that there be recognition of some sort of a balance of representation of the various schools within the district, so we don't, for example, have an disproportionate amount of individuals on the committee that represent a couple of schools but not the other, or whatever. They need to be balanced throughout the town so that the views are kind of taken in from all perspectives within our community. I think that's very important, and just for example, we could have somebody from the Board of Finance who happens to be in this district and somebody from the, RTM from this district or Board of Selectmen, but at least all the areas should be represented, and elementary versus middle school versus high school.
Yeah. For me, the intent of the 3 at-large, and it might be 4, the purpose of those at-large is to look at the various factors. I mentioned a couple of them, but to make sure that the 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school, are represented, and the various, I'll say, neighborhoods within the town are represented. Yes, I think that's the purpose of having some at-large people to balance it off. Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Asa.
Just to that point, it might be helpful to go back and dig up the old ESSU and MSSU committees, the elementary school space utilization and middle school space utilization. That was back before I was on the board, but those were a mix, again, of different town bodies, and again, their meetings were public, so they, and they did have public comment so that anyone from any area could speak to it. But yes, I agree that there should be a mix, but they actually did a pretty good job of having a nice cross-section of people, and granted, it was just elementary and then just middle school, so you'd want to have a combination, but just to kind of give you some ideas.
Yep, Mr. Asa.
When do you hypothetically expect that you will want the results from the committee?
Well, now you're asking me to design the whole thing all at once.
Well, you must have thought about it. So, I mean, I'm assuming the two of you, Dr. Jones and Mr. Chairman, do you have, I guess the question is, do you have an idea of when you would like the results from this committee? Trying to put into perspective, Because it seems
My
like we have a
personal
very,
desire is to write the commission statement and play with the dates and the time frame, and not throw something out that may not either be realistic. My inclination is to have it so that it helps inform the next cycle's budget process, which is for us by February 1 and for the RTM by May. And it might be not wanting to negotiate against ourselves. If we come up with a budget that says, here's representing the needs of the students for the next year, that's generally been our approach, then we wait for the RTM to say, but this is how much we're willing to pay. And then the May and June discussion is, how do you make adjustments? And so my hope is that it informs this board so that come July 1, they know where they're going. But I don't have any more specific time frame than that at the moment. I want to play with it in the writing of the commission statement.
okay, so I would just add that I think it's very important to try and specify that if we are trying to get these results from the committee by, July, February, March, I think it's important because I think we're asking a lot of a group of people, and we just need to make sure that we have those dates when we do, so we keep them on track.
Now, there may be another way of dividing the issues, if you will, is that there may be some issues that even if we agreed to adopt that today, it might be 2 or 3 years before you could implement that issue. It's not an immediate fix. And so it might be that the committee would be asked, by this date, tell us what things you think we can implement as part of the 18-19 budget season and what ideas we should pursue for the next 2 or 3 years. Because not all ideas can be implemented like that.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that, I would hope that we'd set a first date of, and that's where I'd be directed by Dr. Jones, exactly, the first, what is the latest that suggestions could go to Dr. Jones that they could be flushed out by staff and incorporated into that next budget? I mean, the budget issue is upon us. It's not 2-3 years down the road. So maybe that, as part of the statement, an initial report for targeting 2018-19 presented, in the first week of December, and then I'd thought of it as being done at that point. So, and then, thinking long-term, give them more time throughout the spring to continue meeting. But I would definitely hope something would come back out of that committee for the first week of December.
Other comments from board members? Dr. Jones, do you have any comments that you want to make, that you might have questions that you'd want to ask the board for guidance in this particular or that particular area? You don't have to, but I just give you the last word if the board members have nothing further they wish to add.
No, it sounds like you're supportive of the concept, and it's really just trying to be as inclusive as possible. And, I even hope that in this committee, which I'm sure you've all been on committees like this in the past, where at some point it may even be surveying the community, so the input is even broader from the cross-section of our community. And I think having all of these different individuals working together, I think we're going to get really good input, and that's the hope. And I don't normally do this, but looking at the agenda, my guess is we will not be here late. We do allow public comment on agenda items where the public says, I'd like to hear what the board has to say, and then make a comment. So when I get down to the second public comment period, those of you who may have thought of saying something, you're welcome to come forward at that time. If there's no further discussion, Mrs. Lou McCormick.
Just one more comment regarding the committee members. I would also ask if we put some consideration into adding individuals whose voices that we don't hear often, if ever, because I find often that some of the committees are populated by the same people over and over again, which tend to be people that everybody knows here. So can we be more open and invite other individuals to apply for the position and actually purposefully select people who have not necessarily had their voice heard often, but feel strongly about this issue, and let them participate? Because that often is kind of an interesting perspective that we don't hear. That would be additive.
I'm not ignoring you, I'm writing your suggestion down. Okay, thank you. No further comments, then we'll move on to 5A regarding the minutes of the special meeting. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of August 29, 2017. Mrs. Gerber moves. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly seconds. Any comments? Hearing none. I'll ask the board to take action on the motion that says the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of August 29th, 2017. All in favor, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you. 9-0, because Mr. Patton has joined us. Approval of the regular minutes of August 29th. Motion is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of August 29th, 2017. Mrs. Gerber moves. Ms. Pitko seconds. Any discussion? Seeing no hands up, ask the board action for the motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of August 29th, 2017. Please raise your hands. Mr. Patton, Ms. Carnell, Mrs. Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Ms. Pitko, Mr. Acer, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly opposed, Mrs. Eileen Lou McCormick, and Mr. John Llewellyn. The motion passes 7-2. Item 6, Superintendent's report.
Well, for the opening of the school, first of all, we've had a great start to the year, and I see Mr. Collins sitting out here, so I just want to say thank you to him and his entire team. It is not easy to get all of these schools ready, and they just look beautiful. Our sports have started. All of our parent nights have already started. Things are going great. I will say, as far as enrollment, the total enrollment as of, I think it was yesterday, was 9,984. We have 9,930 actually in seats. And our projections at elementary are pretty much where we expected them to be. Some shifts in buildings where one kindergarten might have been bigger at one building versus another, but for the most part, we're where we anticipated. Also, I want to just briefly mention on the racial imbalance update, we were at Hartford last week, and I think that if you haven't had a chance to see the McKinley video, it really is wonderful, and it is on our Fairfield Facebook page, but it gives such a great picture of McKinley's kind of spirit, and it really is an international organic magnet school, which is wonderful, except that the board took a little bit of a different approach, I think, after they saw that and their understanding that McKinley really is a great place. Pretty much the message loud and clear was, oh, the issue is not McKinley, it's a beautiful school, it's your other 10 schools. Now, that is not the intent of the racial imbalance law, but as a result of that, they did approve the plan, which is pretty much benchmark timeline, and I'm sure there was no intent, but the article that was in the paper was probably a little inflammatory in just the way that it was written, and that we haven't agreed to make McKinley a magnet school. Some of the things that were in there sounded very definitive. It's the benchmark timeline that the board approved. Once that was approved, they also passed a resolution, which is where they kind of give us some direction. And I did put a copy we did for you at your seat. And we do have the signed one as of, I think, late yesterday. But pretty much they have us check in to continue review and evaluation by the State Department of Education. That's been normal for us. Providing the reports to the State Board of Ed in a manner whenever they request us to, that's been pretty typical. And then that if they ever want us to do something additional to the plan, they can request that we go back and revise. It's number 2 on here that was different, and what it's talking about is that such review and evaluation shall include, but not be limited to, discussion with the Fairfield Board of Education concerning the feasibility and efficacy of further expanding open choice opportunities as a component of the school district's plan to achieve racial balance, with the outcome of such discussion to be communicated to the state board by the State Department of Education at an appropriate time as determined by the commissioner. What they're asking us to do is go back and discuss open choice. And it was in our plan. In the follow-up that we had given the board, the item was clearly there where it said expanding open choice to the point that we would balance our other 10 schools is not feasible for the district. We couldn't afford to do it, and we wouldn't have the seats. And Dr. Rasmussen had ran the data points for us, and for us to have a 15% balance across the district, it would be bringing in 945 additional students. Now, they did question that calculation, and so we've sent them all the newest calculations last Friday, asked their statisticians to go and provide us if they're calculating in a different manner that we're not understanding. But just to be at even 25% across the district would be, I believe it was 245 students. So it's a phenomenal amount, and again, that would be in year one, because that would be spread out K-5. So when students move from 5th grade to 6th grade, you would then need to replace those students at that elementary level, and that's just to stay at that balance level. So I don't know how much discussion the board would need. I can definitely say from the staff perspective, we would not recommend that we expand in that manner because we couldn't afford to do it. But they did ask us to have that discussion. So that was a little different at this meeting than I think we've had in the past.
This is a difficult issue for some commissioners because they've watched us come to them since 2007, 2008, somewhere around that time, where they started saying you're in impending imbalance, now you are in imbalance. And so some expressed clear frustration that this has not been resolved. The second thing is that I think we have convinced them that programmatically, McKinley is a great school. They're stuck on the legal 1968 law and regulation, which they say they have to enforce. So it's a perfect example of the debate between those two. So comments or questions? Mrs. Lou McCormick, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, Mr. John Llewellyn.
But it is within their power to change that rule, is it not? I mean, if it's antiquated. The State Board of Ed can't do it.
No, the law exists. It's not within their power to change the law, but it's their regulation that created the
Percentage.
definition of 25%. It's within their power to change their regulation.
Right,
But not the law.
right. So they could change the 25% to something else or put caveats within that regulation to redefine. Because it seems to me that the original purpose perhaps was because people were unhappy, that there was some sort of like an unfairness to what was going on. But clearly that's not the case here. Everyone's very happy. So I'm not sure if it's possible. I mean, I'm sure we've already tried, but maybe that we continue to push for change in the legislature, or change not actually in regulation. Because a tweak in regulation would solve, I'm sure, multiple problems if it satisfied certain criteria, one of which being that it actually is a great curriculum, people are happy, and that if they weren't happy, we would accommodate. I mean, what else would you want?
Yep. Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, Mr. Llewellyn, and then followed by Mr. Patton.
Two quick questions. Obviously, part of this was that we would be availing ourselves of their technical assistance. Has that actually come to mean something? Like, what does that look like now?
We met with their committee that's in charge of this program. That was healthy discussion both for us and for the State Board of Education members, to have the chair of that committee be able to say, we had a good discussion, I see where they're coming from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're all aware that we invited the full commission down here, and the third component of that has been pretty reasonable conversation between our superintendent and the two attorneys assigned to this. Is there any further that you'd want to say to that, Dr. Jones?
No, other than, we will send our draft reports and things like that just to make sure we're on the right track. For the bench line time mark, for instance, the timeline, we sent that to them just to make sure that the draft was in the right, going in the right direction. We just last Friday sent the calculations for open choice just to say we believe our calculations are correct. Can you have your statisticians look at these numbers? It's really technical assistance like that. There's not there are only so many ways that we've been able to solve this issue, I guess.
Right, that's why I was wondering what it actually looked like.
Yeah.
And the, this open choice discussion, if the meeting started at 9:30, somewhere around 1:15, this idea came up. within about a 15-minute period, this paragraph was the solution. And they had several questions on, whenever you, in the last 15 minutes, talk about math, and how do these numbers add up, I think some commissioners weren't as quite clear as to what the impact meant. So this was a last-minute thought that came up.
The idea of the open choice. Number two.
Further study to the open choice, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Llewellyn?
Well, I just had, my second question was simply, I think normally we've gotten the pink enrollment sheet with this first meeting. Will we be getting it at the next one?
Is that the pink one? Yeah.
Okay. I know that, but I thought we got some ballpark idea of where they were. Okay, thank you.
I wasn't here last year, so I'm not sure what we did.
Mr. Llewellyn?
Thank you very much. So to follow up on point number 2, all it means is that there's going to be further discussion. There are no teeth. They can't force anything upon us, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then, in kind of taking that and paralleling it to or associating with the new funding formula analysis that was put forth on the governor's proposed changes, because that's going to tie into this as well. It looks like ECS funding for Fairfield got cut to 0 under the current proposal. And it looks as though we're going to receive $2 million or so of teacher pension in the first year and 4.3 or something in the second year. Is that about right? And it does not address what would happen with other funding. It doesn't address
You mean excess cost, which is the next largest?
Correct.
Yeah.
And it doesn't address the open choice. Specifically, it states that kind of in the beginning. So the funding for that could be cut as well to towns like Fairfield that they think are too wealthy to receive funding.
The purpose of open choice is to take students from the cities and enroll them in the suburban districts. So if you cut the subsidy to the suburban districts, there would be virtually no incentive to say yes.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, even at the rate they're paying. But I just wasn't sure if there's any further insight there.
Every day, there's another proposal that's put forward by either the Democratic, Republican, or governor's office, so it's hard to keep up with. But those are the most recent numbers I've heard as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Patton, followed by Ms. Pitko.
Through the chair to Dr. Jones, maybe a year ago, I'm not sure if this was during your tenure or not, but we were given some rough numbers as to how many other towns in the state are still falling under racial imbalance issues, to see where we compared. Have they been resolved? When you were up there, did they give you any kind of update on where other places in the state are faring? And are they similar to us, where it's kind of one school, or is it more of a widespread issue?
I think it was down to just us and one other locality, if I remember correctly. But was it really resolved? If you talk to some of those school districts, not necessarily. They may have built a magnet school and be fighting for the funding that was supposed to come with that school. There are also other areas where it was resolved, and now the percentage is going back up, which is one of the things we've been really concerned about. You do some huge solution, and then you're right back in the same situation 2 years later. So there's not like a report that I'm aware of that actually, and we've asked that even in our technical assistance. Please tell us who to go talk to that had a new and creative solution that actually solved the problem.
Okay, because I seem to recall there was 8 or 9 other districts that, no?
No, not that high.
Not anymore. There's 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's important to note that I think 2 of those 3, or maybe one of those 3, they have a plan that's been accepted, but it's in the implementation stage. And so until it's implemented, you don't know whether you've actually solved it.
Right, so it's not necessarily that there's only 3 left that didn't solve the problem, just 3 left that haven't gotten an approved plan, or...
Yeah, I think so. It's not that many, so therefore, they have a lot of opportunity to focus on
us.
Ms. Pitko.
Through the chair to Dr. Jones, where did we leave it with the state in compliance to follow-up? In other words, when will they be checking that we're actually following through with our plan?
Our firm deadline is June of 19. We will have completed our study of moving the preschool, looking at the magnet program, looking at the impact of open choice, and then looking at redistricting, so that by June of 19, we will say, having done those 4 things, this is where we're going. They understand that it might be a couple of years of implementation beyond that date. So in this resolution, you'll see that they ask for us to come back by June of 19. It's to say, what is our firm implementation and action plan, and then tell us how long it will take to implement it.
Do they have to approve it again in June of 19? What our plan is?
Yes. The plan, you should know that the attorney has consistently told the commission that there are limited ways that they can enforce this rule, but they're not zero. And so therefore, they do have certain options available to them, including that they say you're not implementing the educational interests of the state, therefore you're in, I think it's 10B that you're in violation of, and they will file a complaint about that, and eventually, if we disagree with their decision, we go to court, and eventually some court will say what's good, bad, or indifferent. But, so there's limited, but not zero.
Well, I asked the question as follow-up onto Mr. Llewellyn's question. That's what I wanted to know is, would they eventually take us to court if we did not comply with what we said we were going to do?
Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Just to clarify, haven't they also, my understanding, because I know many people who are completely in favor of having this go to court, but isn't it also that they would cut off funding for buildings? I mean, that would be very tangible millions. That's what my understanding. I mean, obviously, they're already taking money from us.
I'm not sure how far we want to carry this conversation, but, you know, there is that adage that says you can't fight City Hall. There are various ways that we depend upon them to certify teachers, to approve building plans, to provide financing for capital, and it's not like it's a bottomless pit, so can we be at the bottom of the list of plans being reviewed? There are things that they could do that would make life uncomfortable for us, without talking specifically about what they may be, because who knows? You know, you do what your mother asks you to do, or there's something to pay for it. Other comments on McKinley racial imbalance? Yep.
At some point before we get off the superintendent's report, I did have a quick question about the opening of school that I didn't get to ask.
Nothing
So,
left on racial imbalance, so back on to opening of school. Mrs. Gerber.
yeah, through the chair to Dr. Jones, I just had a question about the changing of the meal payment. You know, it went from the My Meals Plus to through Infinite Campus. Was there? I wasn't quite clear what the reason was behind this. Was that like a cost saving? Or was it just, I'm sorry, I guess through the chair to Ms. Mansell, but I just was curious, and some people have asked, and I just wasn't sure exactly what the impetus was behind changing it.
Our superintendent can call on a lifeline whenever she wants, so please introduce yourself.
Doreen Munsell, Director of Finance. It wasn't cost savings, it was we were not happy with the system we were on. We couldn't get the information out that we needed. It was onerous. It's integrated with Infinite Campus, so it's one database. So there were some reasons like that to you know, to go on board. It wasn't the easiest transition. The first day was fine. After that, second day, we had some issues, but we're working on it. It's getting there.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I was just curious as to what exactly had, so it's not so much saving time, saving money, but it's saving time and streamlining things and having it all in one place.
Horizon was they were not responsive to us. I mean, we had to tell them 3 times to shut off the My Meal Pay.
Right, I know, because people were still, I was still getting
Exactly.
emails.
So we had to manually
Yeah.
enter that. So 3 times it took to tell them, and that's what our service was like,
Okay.
on the system, so.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Anything further on school opening? Anything further on school opening? No? Thank you very much. Committee liaison reports. Any committee liaison reports that people like to update us on? Maxine, can I-
Just very briefly, so the policy committee reviewed again the legislative updates that we as a full board reviewed, and so Ms. Deasy will be coming to us for our next policy meeting on Monday, where we're actually going to start tackling those where we are not in compliance. There are a few of them that I don't believe should be an issue, so that's about all we did.
Any questions for Mrs. Maxine Kennelly? Seeing none, okay, nothing else, so therefore on to open board comment for public comment. Anybody wishes to make a comment at the moment? Mrs. Gerber.
Just wanted to mention, in case anyone hadn't seen this yet, Fairfield Living Magazine, the cover story is Why Mentors Matter, and it's about different teenage high school students, and 3 are from Fairfield Public Schools, 2 Ward and 1 Ludlow, and just talking about the importance of mentors. One has a coach, one has a guidance counselor, and one has a teacher who help them, get to be the great kids that they are. So it's a great article if you haven't seen it.
Any other board comments? Seeing none, public comment. If there's any member of the public that wishes to come forward, please state your name and address.
Hello. Hi, my name is Sally Connolly. Thank you very much. And my address is 682 Tunxus Hill Road in Fairfield. Anyway, I wanted to thank everybody for the comments on the racial imbalance. I think all of you know probably by now, but as a mom of 3 children at McKinley, 1 at Tomlinson now, I've been really present and impassioned within the racial imbalance debate, from attending every brainstorming session, actually one with Trudy Durrell probably back, what was that, 8 years ago probably? Longer, maybe 9 or 10 years ago, a committee meeting, to all of the brainstorming sessions at McKinley with Dr. Title, the interim superintendent, to private meeting with Dr. Jones, emailing all of you in the spring, the trip up to Hartford in January, and the public forum, and then I was also at the school for the commissioner's visit. Anyway, there's a couple of things I want to say kind of from the McKinley, well, I should say they're my opinions. I don't want to say I'm representing the McKinley community, but one thing I noticed just over the last few days, you mentioned the article that came out in the Connecticut Post and the spin on it, and it was shared around public, social media. And I really just want to ask that everyone's kind of careful with that information, because for those of us within the McKinley community, and maybe we are a little bit hypersensitive to it, but as you know, we love our school, we're proud of our school, we think it works really well, and we are in the middle of all trying to problem solve this together and come up with ideas. And really, when that's, when it comes up on social media like that, there's kind of, it basically devolved. And we heard comments, even like, one person said, well, maybe McKinley should not even be in district, because how are those students going to be able to assimilate academically at the middle school level? So I think, and I know that's just one person out of many, but I think we need to look at what's going to encourage a productive conversation, how we can all help each other. And I want to continue to really ask Fairfield to really look at everything that McKinley has going for us. I'm so grateful to Dr. Jones and the team for making that video, which really every parent in Fairfield cried, I think, when we watched that and watched our students and our community coming together. And everyone will have an opportunity to come into that for the World's Fair that we have on November 4th. I really invite everyone to put that on their calendars from 10:30 to 2:30. I'm one of the entertainment chairs and the chair of the event. And let's see, I had one last point. Yeah, really, that's what I'm asking. I mean, I have some ideas about some of the law clauses, which I think I had emailed before as ways to kind of divert it, which came up. But that's really it for now. I'm sure I'm at my 2 minutes, but I'll take a glass of water while I'm up
Actually,
here.
it's 3 minutes, and you're
Oh,
at your
oh,
3
you gave
minutes.
me, oh,
Already
okay.
at your 3 minutes.
Okay.
So
Well,
thank you very much for coming
Anyway,
forward.
thank you so much. Wait, the one last thing is, and I know I always get in trouble,
Yeah.
but I want you to share, it came up with our principal, but that McKinley last year with their test scores, we tied a number of schools, but we actually came in third of all the 11 elementary schools. So just, that's our McKinley pride right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to come forward and present to the board? Please state your name and address.
Dabney Bowen, 317 Verna Hill Road. With all due respect, I just wanted to comment to the board that there have been a lot of antiquated laws that were fought in City Hall and repealed in the courtroom for the betterment of our society. So I wonder if the board has considered the cost of fighting this racial imbalance issue in court versus the cost of setting up a magnet school, the open choice program, and other options that have been discussed. I think that it is worth looking at or doing a cost-benefit analysis to see if that can be done, because going to court, I don't think, fighting Big Brother, I don't think is an insurmountable task. And I think that this is an antiquated law. I think that its purpose, when it was put into place, was well-meaning and well-intentioned and certainly necessary. But aside from the regulation having a clause that Eileen mentioned earlier, for cases like this where it's not the intention of the original law, that unless they're willing to go that route, that maybe this is worth a fight. And we can't be the only district in America that's fighting a similar situation. So for whatever it's worth, I think that it's the board should look into when we're examining open choice magnet schools and other options, that going to court should be a viable option that we can look at. So.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come forward? Please state your name and address.
Monique Sudikoff, Lockwood Road. Just one thought on the racial imbalance and the fact that a lot of people call that law antiquated. I just find it really strange that a law that looks to have balance across a community is seen as antiquated. And I understand that the idea is that, hey, it's meant to keep one group from not being equal, and this school has great equality and is a great school. But I think we all suffer when our town doesn't have the diversity spread out. And I know that's probably not a popular view, and that this law has caused us a lot of trouble, and I get that, and it's difficult, but it always hurts me when people say it's antiquated to want diversity, particularly in this time when I think we suffer from a lack of diversity. So it's just a different perspective.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come forward? Please state your name and address.
Good evening, Frank Sahagian, 20 Chelsea Street in Fairfield. Couple things. One, on the racial imbalance issue, as you said, Chairman Dwyer, we have until 2019. I think it's probably inevitable that we'll be redistricting by then based on the numbers, so I think it's actually a moot point. And we can easily address it by redrawing the lines so they don't look like the gerrymandering that we have at the state level. It is a relatively easy fix, frankly, in my opinion. Second, in terms of the numbers, and Dr. Jones, you said the numbers are pretty much in line, the enrollment numbers. And, the devil's in the details in all these things, oftentimes. And I know we've employed, I guess it's MGT is the firm we've used for these projections. And one of the comments before they give you the numbers has the following quote: "The determination of future kindergarten enrollment estimate is critical, especially for projections exceeding more than 5 years." So I would say the bottom line number in projected for 17-18 was 99.85. We're at 99.84. On surface, that looks great. Now look at the details. Second grade, the estimate was 754. According to our budget, we're at 681. That's off by almost 10%. First grade, the projection was 755. The budget is at 668. That's off by almost 12%. Kindergarten, the estimate was 726. The budget is at 637. That's off by 14%. So the point is, they actually look out to 2024, projecting a basically relatively flat number. But you know what? Just like their opening statement, those kindergarten numbers are key. The trend is terrible. The trend is taking us in a different direction. In my former life in business, when I hired consultants, 98% of the time, they were a waste of money. 98% of the time. I know they have our database, and that's probably why we keep them. But I would fire them. If this was my consultant, I would fire them for their projections. So I would ask you, as you look at these numbers, to pay attention to the details. Make sure we don't miss the details, because it's frightening. And I think, again, what that takes me back full circle, we're going to have to redistrict. And we'll probably have to close the school. And I'm a teacher, and that's the last thing I want to see as well. But I don't see how. I think it's probably staring us in the face, and us putting so much weight into this consulting firm is dangerous, to say the least. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come forward? Please state your name.
Thank you. Bob Smoller. I'm president of the Fairfield Education Association. I want to applaud the committee that you're about to embody. I think it's long overdue and hopeful that it'll produce results. I do hope when you charge the committee that you'll take the long view and really look at, and when I say long, I mean really long, not 2 or 3 years, and really look at what is the best instructional structure that we can have with the greatest efficiency. We are at a historic point. We've got a AAA bond rating. We've got the lowest interest rates in history that I can remember. If there is a better structure out there, independent of what our existing situation looks like, I think we should think about putting that structure in place and then figuring out how we get from point A to point B. The other thing I'd say, depending on what happens with the state budget, this project is going to go from being urgent to really, really urgent very quickly. Because if we don't get some of these hard decisions made on operational and structural changes, we're going to be sitting here talking about what program and service cuts we're going to make versus how we're going to reorganize the district. So I do think that we do need a sense of urgency, and I do think the hard choices need to be made in order for us to maintain what is really the heart and soul of the Fairfield Public Schools. I think the last thing I'd like to say is regarding the makeup of the committee. There's some really interesting work that needs to take place, and I would hope that you would pay attention to the skills and knowledge that the members of this committee bring to the table. I think Ms. Lou McCormick makes a good point about hearing from voices that haven't been heard from in the past. But the reality is you need people with some facilities background on this committee. You need people who've been in business. You need people with skills, knowledge, abilities that can really get something done quickly because you're not going to have a lot of time frame on here. So those are my few comments, and I hope it's successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to come forward and speak at this time? Please state your name and address.
John Convertito, 62 Oyster Road. I too applaud the initiative taken by this board to put this committee together. I would echo what Mr. Smoller has just said, but also give you a caution as to not make this about elementary schools, parents on the committee, middle school parents on the committee, and so forth. It needs to first be about the structure. You can then debate how it affects, and parents can get involved in it after you have your recommendation. This should be a factual, a committee to do factual analysis and factual determination, okay? Keep emotion out of it. And get the facts first, then you can debate it.
Please state your name and address.
Christine Vitale, 254 Vernon Hill Road. I echo many of the public comments here. I think this committee is overdue, but I almost wonder, it sounds like a very big charge. You're talking about organizational structural change. You're talking about facilities, so the knowledge base for facilities could be very different than looking at great reconfiguration. So I keep it in mind. I mean, I think that deadline, part of the committee has a very tight deadline, but some of the work that the committee is being charged to do might be longer in focus. So I'm almost wondering if maybe there should be two. Just something to think about. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to come forward? Seeing none, I'll only make one comment. When you're advancing a construction project for approval by the state, one of the state requirements is that we submit a 10-year enrollment projection. And so while we rely on consultants for certain information and advice, specifically there has to be an enrollment projection as part of the application for state financing. Any final comments? So if not, we'll go on to adjournment. Recommended motion that this regular meeting of the Board of Education adjourn. Mrs. Pitko, well, I second. Seconded by Ms. Carnell. Everybody raise their hand. It's unanimous. Thank you very much.